So when is a Chinese car not Chinese? When Europe has a target to reduce pollution and needs low or zero emission cars to reach it. Can't make them for themselves, so they just buy in kits of EVs made in China and then just assembled over here in the EU. But only in those countries with the cheapest labour rates. How does that help the German auto worker who's losing their job? Well, hi, I'm Dave. Welcome to Dave Takes It On. Europe needs EVs, or clean energy vehicles, whatever you call them. But at present, they can't make their own at an affordable price, which people will buy in sufficient numbers to smash through into mass production. So Stellantis, many others, they've turned to China and entered into joint ventures. Stellantis has invested over $1.5 billion into a Chinese firm, Leap Motors, over in China, and they're making over there something they call the budget SUV, full EV. It's called the T03. It's designed, built and finished in China. They then break it down into kit form, put it into boxes, ship it to Poland, and there it's reassembled and sold as European. And that's because the European definition of a car is where a car is made, i.e. Europe, and so automakers beat the rules and say, well, fine, doesn't matter where it comes from, but if it's assembled in Europe, it's European, doesn't have any tariffs. Yeah, well, that's exactly the same as the manufacturing we've done with the Japanese for decades now. Toyota, Honda factories, they haven't been manufacturing factories, they've often just been assembly plants. And they haven't been making their own engines or body panels. A lot of it's just shipped in from elsewhere. And the same applies with automakers all around the world. The reason they do it is just purely down to price. So if you look at look at America and Mexico. Mexico has a much more lax safety, health and safety regime and pollution regulations, and very, very low labour costs. And although the amount of human labour going into a car these days is much less than before with the advent of robots, it's still a sizable part of the overall cost. Somewhere they reckon around about $2,000 or $3,000. So companies are always looking for ways to reduce the cost. And the easiest way, as Apple has found, and Nike and Dyson, is just go to China, somewhere else with really cheap labour and more lax health and safety and pollution. So they all these manufacture in China. Now, I know some of them now are reducing the Chinese manufacturing. That's political, but they're still there at the moment. So if you move your manufacturing somewhere else, then that can reduce your cost drastically. However, you then face the problem of tariffs, with countries like America and Europe are saying, well, if you want to import Chinese cars, you're going to pay a tariff up to 100%. And so that answer's no longer on the table for you. You can't just buy the cheapest cars, badge them, and bring them over here, because now you're going to have anything up to a 100% tariff on the price of the car. And that puts it way out of the market for some of them. So they've come up with an answer, and that's joint ventures. Ford, General Motors, they both have them. Both manufacture EVs and petrol cars in China. And so Stellantis in this case is in a joint venture. They put in over $1.5 billion with Leap Motors. That's a pure Chinese company. Now, Stellantis and Ford and GM don't actually do very much. Chinese are generally the ones, they design it, they build it, source all the supply chains, they make all the vehicles, and they make it really cheap. And then they just take them to bits and send them over here to the poorer EU countries with high unemployment, low wages. Countries like Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, Serbia. There's so many of them. All of them got spare labour, there's very high unemployment, and many of them have already got empty factories. Europe for a long time has been making cars in the cheap labour countries. Poland have got factories in Fisk got factories in Poland, and Citroën also make the Citroën EC3 over there. So they're in there because it's much cheaper in Poland than it is in Italy to make a car. So all that happens, many of the factories, they've got out the business now. They've gone out of business to sell the old ice cars, so these factories have stood empty. And so in this case, Stellantis has just offered to Leap Motors, yeah, here's your factory. You don't need high-tech, state-of-the-art factory if all you're doing is assembling them and you've got loads of cheap labour. But they can then legally sell that car as a European car and avoid tariffs. It was made in Europe. Well, it's strange how you can get around the rules if you really want to. And it's not just them doing it. Citroën, as I mentioned. I believe they actually use the same factory in Poland for the C3. There's only one company, European company, that's really actually making everything in their home country, and that's Renault with the Renault 5. And this one, yeah, it's made in a French factory with French labour, French everything. But then they spoil it when it comes to the Twingo, which is a much smaller model. That one, they're going to be working with Chinese designers. It's going to be under 20,000 euros. And that one, certainly bits of it, will be shipped over. But that will still be made in, I think, Slovenia, this one. Be assembled there, and also possibly some French factories. And again, sold into Europe with zero tariffs. But this obviously gives a big problem, big headache to the EU Commission. You've got the President, Ursula von der Leyen, and she's trying desperately to put tariffs onto the Chinese imports to encourage local employment, local factories, local production of cars. But what the manufacturers do is they just look for the cheapest way they can do it. And they don't care about who they employ or whether they employ any Europeans at all. So what it means is they're just finding all these loopholes, and the EU Commission has got a really big choice. They can either say, well, we're no longer going to class those cars as made in whatever country it is, if they're actually mainly made abroad in China. But then you get looking into the constituent parts. How much of a car has to be made in China before you put tariffs on it? And that gives us a problem because Renault, for example, has got to deal with LG. Well, LG is a South Korean company, one of the largest battery manufacturers for EVs in the world. But they're now in talks with CATL in China for them to supply the chemicals for the cathode, which is the biggest part of the expense of the battery. And so shortly, if these deals come to anything, LG, a South Korean company, will be making batteries using a good percentage of Chinese components. So could the European Commission go further? Could they say, right, let's count the nuts and the bolts? You know, if you buy any of your screws from China, does that count against you? Are we going to put a €1 tariff for every screw? It's going to get ridiculous. It's all going to fall apart. And then whatever they decide, whatever the rules are, manufacturers always will find a way around it. So we have a silly situation at the moment. This EU tariff is supposedly going to take effect in November. Hasn't started yet. It's supposed to be finalised in November to start in December. But so many companies, BMW and Mercedes, two of them, are already up in arms, fighting like mad against it because it affects everything. It's got a knock-on effect. I believe it's got very little chance of getting through as it was originally proposed. The traditional manufacturers are losing jobs, but Poland, Serbia and Slovenia, they're laughing all the way to the bank. They've never had it so good. Finally, we're going to end up in Europe with an awful lot of Chinese manufactured but European assembled cars. But at the end of the day, it gets dark. Oh, and does it really matter? Someone in Europe is assembling cars. They're employed. They're a member of the European Union. They're citizens. They need jobs. So if they can all be fully employed, that's great. And you fill up all of their capacity, you're going to have to look for other countries within Europe to set up factories. And some of them are already looking to take advantage. So there's a company called Sherry, Chely, which is set up in Spain. It's been negotiating with the Spanish government. They've got a massive youth unemployment problem, huge. And so the government is talking with the Chinese to get these people into work. Now, if it takes youths off the streets into employment, money in their pocket, does the Spanish government really mind how it was achieved? And if they don't, does the European Commission mind they might overrule them? This is going to get messy. Well, this could be the answer. It is a much more complicated situation out there, but what's likely to happen is we're going to be seeing lots of cheaper cars, and the buying population want cheaper EVs with better range, better performance, better, faster charging, and everything else. And they're now firmly on the horizon. So let's see what happens. My prediction is all these tariffs are just going to fade away eventually. EU will lose face. That includes America as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Leave your comments below if you disagree. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please click the like button. And if you'd like to see more, please subscribe. And thanks very much to our Patreon members.